What do you picture when you hear the word Viking? You probably see dragon-prowed longships crashing through the waves, and fearsome warriors with axes and shields storming a misty coastline. For 300 years, from roughly 793 to 1066 AD, that image was a terrifying reality for much of Europe. But then, almost as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. The thunder of Thor's hammer faded, replaced by the peal of church bells. So where did the Vikings go? Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're diving deep into one of history's greatest transformations: how the Viking world of pagan chieftains became the Christian kingdoms of Scandinavia. To understand how the Viking Age ended, we first need to understand what it was. It might surprise you to learn that Viking wasn't an ethnicity. It was a job description. To go a Viking in Old Norse meant to head out on an overseas expedition to raid, trade, or explore. These were farmers, merchants, and chieftains who, for a season, became Vikings. And what made them so successful? A combination of factors, including population growth and political squabbles at home, pushed ambitious men to seek their fortunes abroad. But their trump card was a technological marvel: the longship. This masterpiece of naval engineering was fast, flexible, and had a shallow draft, allowing it to sail up rivers and strike deep inland where no one expected an attack. It was the key that unlocked the world for them, from North America to Constantinople. Viking Age Scandinavia wasn't made of unified countries. It was a patchwork of territories run by local chieftains, or jarls, whose power depended on military success and personal loyalty. Society was governed at regional assemblies called a thing, where free men gathered to make laws and settle disputes. This was a world steeped in a complex pagan faith. They worshipped two tribes of gods: the warrior-like Aesir, led by the wise and cunning Odin, and his powerful son Thor. And they worshipped the Vanir, gods of fertility like Freyr and Freya. Their worldview was shaped by concepts like fate and the promise of Valhalla for warriors who died bravely in battle. It was a society perfectly adapted for expansion and raiding. But the world around them was changing, and that change would create a pincer movement of pressure that would ultimately bring the Viking Age to a close. The first arm of the pincer was external pressure. The Europe that the Vikings had so easily plundered in the 9th century was getting its act together. In England, Alfred the Great built a network of fortified towns and a navy to fight back. In Francia, stronger rulers emerged, and the Vikings who settled there became the Normans, who then guarded the coast against new raiders. To the south of Denmark, the powerful and aggressively Christian Holy Roman Empire rose, viewing its pagan neighbors as a threat to be conquered or converted. Simply put, raiding was becoming a lot harder and a lot less profitable. The second arm of the pincer was internal ambition. The shrewdest Scandinavian rulers looked at the Christian kingdoms of Europe and saw a new, more powerful model of kingship. A Viking chieftain was just the first among equals, his power constantly challenged and dependent on the loot he brought home. But a Christian king was king by the grace of God. His authority came from heaven, placing him above all other men. To rebel against him wasn't just a political act, it was a sin. This was a revolutionary idea, a perfect tool for breaking the power of rival jarls and establishing a stable hereditary monarchy. And the church didn't just offer an ideology, it offered a practical toolkit for running a state. In a largely illiterate society, priests and monks were the only ones who could read and write. They could run a royal administration, draft laws, and keep financial records. The church also introduced written law codes and, most importantly, the tithe, a 10% tax on all produce. Kings quickly learned to use this system to create a stable income for the crown, funding armies and infrastructure. For an ambitious ruler, conversion wasn't just about faith, it was the ultimate power upgrade. So how did this transformation actually play out? It happened differently in each kingdom, starting with the pragmatic pioneers in Denmark. Because of its location next to the Holy Roman Empire, Denmark was the first to feel the pressure. The architect of Christian Denmark was a king with a now famous name, Harald Bluetooth. Around the year 965, Harold raised a massive monument, the Jelling Stone, which has been called Denmark's baptismal certificate. On it, he carved an inscription boasting that he had won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. The story goes that a missionary named Popo proved the power of the Christian God by carrying a red-hot piece of iron without being burned, which convinced Harold to convert. The reality was probably more political. By adopting Christianity, Harold neutralized the Holy Roman Empire's main excuse for invading his lands. It was a brilliant strategic move. But Harold didn't just declare himself a Christian king, he acted like one. He launched a massive building program, constructing at least 5 enormous, geometrically perfect circular fortresses across his kingdom. These were not just defenses, they were barracks for his royal army, designed to enforce his will and crush any opposition from local chieftains. Harold had created the template for a unified Christian Danish state, a project brought to its peak by his grandson, Canute the Great, who ruled a vast North Sea empire of Denmark, England, and Norway, and presented himself as a model European Christian monarch. If Denmark's conversion was a story of political calculation, Norway's was a saga written in blood and fire. Norway's rugged landscape of fjords and mountains meant power was fiercely local, and pagan traditions ran deep. The first real attempt at conversion was by King Haakon the Good in the mid-10th century, who had been raised as a Christian in England. His gentle approach was a complete failure. The local chieftains forced him to participate in a pagan sacrifice to prove his loyalty to the old ways. A generation later, a new king would try a much more brutal approach. His name was Olaf Tryggvason, a classic Viking who had converted to Christianity while raiding in England. He returned to Norway in 995 with a single, fanatical mission: unite the country and convert it, by any means necessary. His method was simple and terrifying: baptism or battle. The sagas tell gruesome stories of him torturing and executing pagan leaders who resisted. His 5-year reign was a whirlwind of violence that shattered the public practice of the old religion before he was killed in a great sea battle in the year 1000. The man who finished the job was Olaf Haraldsson, who would become Norway's patron saint. Like Tryggvason, he was a former Viking who returned to claim the throne and enforce Christianity with an iron will. But he was also a systematic state builder. At the Mosterthing in 1024, he established a national law code that made Christianity the only legal religion and set up the church as a formal institution of the kingdom. His ruthless centralization made him many enemies, and in 1030 he was killed at the Battle of Stiklestad, fighting an army of his own countrymen. But in death, Olaf achieved his greatest victory. The Danish rule that followed was unpopular, and a wave of national regret swept the country. Miracles were reported at his grave. His body was said to be incorruptible. The church, seizing the moment, declared him a saint and a martyr. The brutal king was transformed into Saint Olaf, the holy, eternal king of Norway. A powerful national cult grew around his tomb in Nidaros, which became the spiritual heart of the nation. The Norwegian monarchy, national identity, and Christianity were now fused together forever. Sweden's journey was the slowest and most fractured of all. The kingdom was divided between the southern Geats, who were more open to Christian influence, and the northern sphere, who remained defiantly pagan. At the heart of the pagan resistance was the great temple at Uppsala, a major religious center where national sacrifices were held to Odin, Thor, and Freyr. The first Christian king, Olaf Skotkonung, was baptized around the year 1008, but his power was mostly limited to the south. He couldn't touch the pagan stronghold of Uppsala. What followed was over a century of conflict that was part civil war, part religious war. Christian kings from the south would try to rule the whole country, only to be rejected by the pagan north for refusing to lead the sacrifices at Uppsala. One Christian king, Ing the Elder, was even driven into exile before returning to burn his pagan rival in his hall and reclaim the throne. The final victory came when the temple at Uppsala was finally destroyed in the late 11th or early 12th century. In a powerful symbol of triumph, a Christian church was built directly on its ruins. The decisive moment came in 1164, when the Pope established a new archbishopric for all of Sweden, placing its seat right at Uppsala. The former heart of pagan resistance was now the center of the new Swedish national church. The long, slow birth of the Kingdom of Sweden was finally complete. The end of the Viking Age was really the beginning of modern Scandinavia. The decentralized world of chieftains was replaced by centralized kingdoms with laws, bureaucracies, and tax systems. The economy shifted from raiding to agriculture and trade, and the culture was transformed by a new faith that brought with it new ethics, literacy, and art. Historians traditionally mark the symbolic end of the era with one dramatic event, the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. There, the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada, often called the last great Viking, launched a massive invasion of England. He was defeated and killed, marking the end of the last great Viking-style conquest. And one of the most surprising legacies of this era is probably in your pocket right now. The wireless technology that connects your phone and headphones is called Bluetooth. It was named in 1997 in honor of King Harald Bluetooth, who was famous for uniting the warring tribes of Denmark. The iconic logo is a bind rune, combining the ancient Norse runes for his initials, H and B. So the transformation that ended the Viking Age was not a simple death, but a complex and fascinating evolution. It was driven by a mix of external pressure from a more organized Europe and the internal ambitions of visionary leaders who saw Christianity as a tool to forge nations. The Viking raider didn't disappear, he became a king. His energy was turned from plundering abroad to building a state at home, laying the foundations for the Scandinavian nations we know today. So what are your thoughts on this incredible transformation? Let us know down in the comments below. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.